Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be talking about the parables of the kingdom as found in Matthew chapter 13 as we continue our study of the life of Christ. We already saw how we have in that chapter, Matthew 13, the parable of the sower, the parable of the wheat and weeds, or we could call it, I suppose, the wheat and the tares, the parable of the mustard seed, and the parable of leaven. And in all four of these parables, there is something that is planted. There is a growth and transformation, growth of the seed that's planted, and then it transforms into something. There is a realization of result at the end of the season of growth. That is, there's a harvest of some sort. And so we come to Matthew chapter 13, beginning in verse 24. Jesus presented another parable to them, saying the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed. Here's the wheat and the weeds. He sows good seed in his field, but while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went away. So here his enemy sows on top of the good seed that is sowed. But when the wheat sprouted and bore grain, then the tares, the weeds, became evident also. And the slaves of the landowner came and said to him, Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have tares? Where did the weeds come from? And he said to them, An enemy has done this. And the slaves said to him, Well, how are we going to fix it? Do you want us then to go and gather up the weeds? But he said, No, for while you are gathering up the tares, you may uproot the wheat with them. Allow both to grow together until the harvest, and in the time of the harvest I will say to the reapers, First gather up the tares, and bind them in bundles, and burn them up, and then gather the wheat into my barn. So there's going to be a season, that's the point of the parable, there's going to be a season where the wheat and the weeds grow up together, and they will continue together until the time of the harvest, and then, notice then there's a separation between the wheat and the weeds. Now, here's the point. Both are to grow together. They're going to be separated at the harvest. And then at that time, the weeds, the tares, the part that you don't want to keep, are going to be taken out and burned. Now, he presented then another parable. Now, you say, boy, we went through that parable fast. We're going to see the explanation a bit later. But he just gives the parable, and then he gives another parable on top of that. Now, that parable, we're going to see in a minute, was talking about the kingdom. How in the kingdom there is both good and bad, and they grow up together. There are God's people and not God's people, and they grow up together, and eventually there comes a separation. But now we have to look at this other parable. He presented another parable to them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field. And this is smaller than all the other seeds. You've got this tiny little seed, but when it's full grown, it's larger than the garden plants. It becomes, it's such a big bush, it almost becomes a tree. So that the birds of the air come and nest in its branches. So here is this parable of a seed that starts very small, and it gets to be very big. So big that the birds of the air come and nest in its branches. That's a picture of the kingdom. The kingdom starts really small. One little Jewish rabbi and 12 disciples up in an upper room. And it grows to fill the entire world. That's the point of the parable. It starts small, it ends big. It starts really tiny, and it ends, even the birds can come and nest in its branches. Now, next parable. He presented another parable to them, saying, The kingdom of heaven, notice all of these parables are parables of the kingdom. They're telling us what the kingdom of heaven is like. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field. Well, no, we just read that. But notice that phrase at the end, so that the birds of the air come and nest in its branches. I think that's significant. It is significant because it's an Old Testament citation. Ezekiel chapter 17, where Ezekiel is giving a parable, although he calls it a riddle, the riddle/parable of the house of Israel. And there in Ezekiel 17, he says in verse 23, on the high mountain of Israel I will plant it. I will plant this vine, that it may bring forth boughs and bear fruit and become a stately cedar. And birds of every kind will nest under it, and they will nest in the shade of its branches. When Jesus adds that reference to the birds of the air nesting in its branches, that's a quote from this Old Testament prophecy, Ezekiel chapter 17, which was talking about the house of Israel, and yet Jesus is applying it to the kingdom. And when we read it from our New Testament perspective, we see it's the kingdom that exists today in what we call today the church. Back in Ezekiel chapter 17, Israel was likened to a vine that is uprooted, and it's taken to a high mountain, and it is replanted. And the question, is it going to grow? Will it grow? Usually when you pull a vine out of the ground, you take it and stick it somewhere else, it has a good chance of dying. Israel as a nation had been pulled out and replanted. Is it going to grow? And the answer in Ezekiel's parable, in Ezekiel's riddle, is yes, it will. It will grow, and not only will it grow, the birds of every kind will nest under it. God promises to plant this tender twig. And it will have such growth that the birds will come and nest. And that brings up a question, when you have a parable like this, not every single aspect necessarily represents something, but we still have to ask, do the birds represent something? Maybe they're there just to hold up the picture. You have a tree and you get birds, and in other words, just to show the size of the tree. Maybe that's all. Or maybe it's showing that this branch will be of such a nature, this plant will be of such a nature as it grows, that others that weren't even part of it are going to come in. And if that's the picture, then maybe it's a picture that not only will Israel grow, but there's going to be other parts that joined Israel that weren't even Israel, that were like birds of every kind, that were like, can I say it? That were like Gentiles. Well, let's go to the next parable. Matthew chapter 13, verse 33, he spoke another parable to them. Here it is. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven. Now, leaven is that stuff you put into bread to make the bread rise. We call it yeast. And you put in a little bit of leaven. You don't have to do a lot. And it affects the whole lump of bread so that the entire loaf rises. And the kingdom of heaven is like leaven. Now, when you see leaven in the Old Testament, it usually refers to a negative influence, a sinful influence. But not here. Here the kingdom of heaven is like leaven. I think this is the exception to the general rule. It still pictures influence, but not, in this case, a negative influence. I think here the kingdom of heaven is a positive influence. And the kingdom of heaven is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 pecks of flour until it was all leavened. And she just had to put a little leaven, and it affects the entire lump of dough. And the kingdom is like that. You take a little bit of kingdom. Remember the earlier parable? Kingdom starts off like a mustard seed, really small and grows really big. A little bit of kingdom put into the bread of the world affects the entire world. And indeed it has done that. Christianity has its influence and its effect throughout all the world. Now, all these things Jesus spoke to the crowds in parables, and he did not speak to them without a parable. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet, I will open my mouth in parables, I will utter things hidden since the foundation of the world. So here Jesus, he's speaking in these parables. Notice there's been a specific shift. We saw that last week. There has been a specific shift as he, instead of speaking plainly, when it comes to speaking to the crowds, he begins to speak to them in this hidden way. And parables are both illustrating truth, but they're also hiding truth. They are doing both. Now, in doing so, he is fulfilling prophecy. Here's the prophecy, Psalm chapter 78, verses 1 through 4. Listen, O my people, to my instruction. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not conceal them from their children, but tell to the generation to come the praise of the Lord and his strength and his wondrous works that he has done. Here it had been prophesied that God would speak in parables, in dark sayings, in things that had not before been seen, and that there would be both that which was veiled would be unveiled to those who were joined to God's people, to the fathers and the children, the generation to come, that they might hear the praises of the Lord. So parables both illustrate truth to those who believe, but they also hide truth to those who don't believe. Well, Matthew chapter 13, verse 36, then he left the crowds and went into the house, and his disciples came to him. You notice they wait until nobody's listening, and they say, explain to us the parable of the tares of the field. We really didn't get that one. Can you? Now maybe they didn't get the others either, but I think that one is going to help explain the others. And he said, the one who sows the good seed, that's the Son of Man, that's Jesus. He's the one who's sowing the good seed. His teaching is that good seed. And the field is the the field is the world. And as for the good seed, these are the sons of the kingdom. And the tares are the sons of the evil one. So notice the Son of Man, Jesus, is sowing seed, but there's an enemy who's also sowing seed, and people are either the sons of the kingdom, or they are sons of the evil one. You're somebody's son. Somebody asks, who's your daddy? Well, you have to ask, are you good seed or are you bad seed? Verse 39, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. And the harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. So notice he goes through and he assigns parts to all of the players in the parable. And just as the tares are gathered up and burned with fire, so shall it be at the end of the age. So this parable is picturing this entire age from beginning to end, and showing that there's growth, but there's growth both of God's people and those who are not God's people, and it ends with judgment. The Son of Man will send forth his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all stumbling blocks and those who commit lawlessness, and will throw them into the furnace of fire. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Notice that there are going to be God's people and not God's people that will grow together, and sometimes they might even look alike. Sometimes they might be sitting together in the same church and in the same pew. But there will come a time when there will be a separation, and the angels will gather out of his kingdom all the stumbling blocks, and there will be a judgment. And then that judgment will bring about weeping and gnashing of teeth. And then the righteous will shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Are you one of the righteous? Are you one of God's people? Or have you been planted by the enemy? Well, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. And listen up. Don't miss this point, because this is important for your eternal destiny. Whose son are you? Have you come to Christ in faith and believed in him and accepting the salvation that he has provided on your behalf? He's quoting really from Daniel chapter 12, speaks of the same thing, about how Daniel 12:2 says, many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake, these to everlasting life, but the others to disgrace and everlasting contempt. And then he goes on to say, those who have insight will shine brightly at the brightness of the expanse of heaven. Notice the words are right out of Daniel. And those who lead the many to righteousness, like the stars forever and ever. Jesus isn't really giving new truth, He's just saying that old truth, that old promise that was back in the Old Testament is now being fulfilled. And this is part of that. This is the kingdom. He goes on to another parable now. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in the field, which a man found and hid again. Notice this man comes along, he finds the treasure, and he says, gee, that's a treasure, but it's not my field. And so he takes the treasure and puts it back where he found it, and he hid it again, and from joy over it, he wants it so bad, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field so that he can get the treasure that's hidden in the field. Now, on the one hand, that seems, gee, not quite honest. He didn't report to anyone that he had found a treasure there. But that's not the point of the parable. The point of the parable is that he found that which was valuable, and he let nothing stand in his way of obtaining that which he wanted. And the kingdom of heaven is like that. It is like the treasure, and you can find it, and if you find it, then don't let anything stand in your way of getting it. Not possessions, not plans, not ambitions. Sell what you have, get rid of anything that's in your way, and obtain the kingdom. Again, and I think the again is because maybe this is a similar sort of parable. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking fine pearls. Now, in the last parable, there was a man who just happened upon the treasure in the field. He wasn't necessarily looking for it. He just, whoop, there it was. This time, we have someone who's looking for the treasure. A merchant, he's seeking fine pearls, and he finds one pearl of great value. Notice what he does. He does the same thing that the previous guy in the parable did. He goes and sells all that he has and bought it. Again, he says, I have to have that great treasure because it's worth more than anything else. And the kingdom, that's the point of the kingdom, it's worth more than anything else. Get the kingdom. Don't settle for costume and jewelry. Don't settle for something less than the kingdom, because it is the greatest value of all. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet cast into the sea. Now, a dragnet is you could have a small net you throw and you just pull stuff, but a dragnet is a really big net, because that's the dragging part. You're going to lay out this really big net in maybe a big sort of semicircular pattern, and then you're going to pull it in, and as it pulls it in, you pull it in, it just picks up everything there. So it is cast into the sea and gathering fish of every kind, maybe even a couple of boots or whatever happens to be there, it's going to gather. And when it was filled, they drew it up on the beach, because a dragnet's really big. You don't want to try to pull it onto a boat, it just won't fit. They pull it up on the beach, and they sat down and gathered the good into containers, but the bad, and I think it's the good fish, it's the stuff you want to keep, you put into containers, but the bad they threw away. You said, oop, I got some scummy thing, just toss that. And this reminds us of the previous parable of the wheat and the tares, where they grow together, and then the weeds are taken out and burned, and the wheat is gathered, and that's good. Here again, that which is good is kept, the bad is thrown away. The kingdom is like that. It will have both good and bad within it, but there comes a time when there will be a separation. So it will be at the end of the age. Here's the explanation of the parable. The angels will come forth and take out the wicked from among the righteous, and will throw them into the furnace of fire, and in that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, and we already read about that. And so at the end of the age, notice they grow together, they're gathered together, but then there's a separation. And at the time of the separation, then you'll find out, am I the good or the bad? Am I the wheat or the weeds? Am I God's people or am I the devil's people? Now Jesus asks, have you understood all these things? And they said to him, yes. I'm not sure they really had. And Jesus said to them, therefore every scribe who has become a disciple of the kingdom of heaven is like a head of a household, who brings out of his treasure things new and old. Notice the emphasis on this saying, and this is sort of a mini parable too. there's things new and old. And in the kingdom, there's things new and old. And in the teachings of Jesus regarding the kingdom, there's things new and old. The old part are those parts that had already been given in the Old Testament. What's the new part? The new part is that Jesus himself is on the scene. It's here. You don't have to wait for the future. It's not just a promise. Now Jesus is bringing about the fulfillment. And the fulfillment is in his day, and it continues in our day as well. We're still in that new part. We are still seeing the outgrowth and the continuing growing together of the kingdom. And we wait for that final separation, that final judgment, when he comes back. When Jesus had finished these parables, by the way, that's the way, remember we said when Jesus had finished these words, here's when he'd finished these parables, that marks the end of the sermon. He departed from there. He leaves. And he goes on his way. He came to his hometown and began teaching them in their synagogue, so that they were astonished and said, "Where did this man get this wisdom and these miraculous powers? Is not this the carpenter's son? Is this not his mother called Mary, and his brothers James and Joseph and Simon and Judas? And his sisters, aren't they all with us?" Who is this Jesus? He just doesn't seem to match the family. After all, he's one of us. He's one of the hometown family, one of the homeboys. Messiahs just don't seem to come from Nazareth. So who is this? Where did he get these things? And they took offense at him. Now, if you want to read the longer version of this, it's found in Luke chapter 4. But we're not going to do that right now. They took offense at him, but Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor." A prophet's always honored, except in his hometown and in his own household. You see, there's something about a prophet. He is looked at as an expert by everybody except those who are too close to him. And notice he did not do many miracles there because of their unbelief. Jesus comes on the scene, and because he was too familiar, too close, they rejected him. Because they couldn't see that he came from afar. Sometimes we have people who have grown up in church that are just too close to Christianity. And the answer isn't to go away. The answer is to see the one with whom you've become acquainted. See him for who he really is, and to believe in his name.